A Dragon Ball Super remake wasn't on anyone's bingo card for the franchise's next big move. When whispers first started popping up from leakers and major Dragon Ball YouTubers, the response online was mixed to say the least. On one side, you had fans who were just relieved at the idea of anything anime related returning to the franchise. After years of radio silence, even crumbs felt like a meal. On the other side were fans who flat out said they'd walk away if they had to sit through Battle of Gods for a fourth time. And honestly, I get both reactions. The Dragon Ball Super anime ended back in 2018. That's nearly 8 years ago now. Since then, the only animated project we've gotten is Dragon Ball Daima, and while it looked great, it was a smaller scale story and not super. For a lot of fans, even after watching it, there was still this lingering sense of being unfulfilled. So when the idea of Super finally coming back surfaced, only for the catch to be that it might have been a remake, that wasn't exactly what people were hoping to hear. That said, I don't think a remake is automatically a bad idea, but there's a very thin line this project would have to walk. If the remake exists purely to polish the animation, that's honestly the worst case scenario. When Dragon Ball Super first aired, it was clearly rushed. That rushed production gave us some of the most infamous visuals in modern anime history, scenes that have memed into the ground and probably will never die. While the animation did improve over time, it was never consistently strong across the entire series. Now compare that to Dragon Ball Daima, which looked absolutely fantastic from start to finish. It's easy to see why fans want super content with that level of polish. But remaking the series just to fix the animation issues? That's a massive undertaking, and for most fans, it's nowhere near close to enough. We've been replaying Super for 8 years. We know the story beats by heart. At this point, visuals alone aren't what fans are craving anymore. What people really want are stronger moments, tighter storytelling, and meaningful improvements, not just prettier versions of scenes we've already memorized. If a Super remake is going to exist, it needs to offer more than a visual upgrade. Otherwise, it risks feeling redundant instead of exciting. Next, if the idea is to redo Dragon Ball Super with new animation and tell a different story, I don't think that's a good idea either. Don't get me wrong, Super isn't perfect. There are absolutely areas where it could have been handled better. I've never been a huge fan of the anime version of the Goku Black arc, for example. But at this point, the story has settled. Fans have grown accustomed to it, accepted its flaws, and built years of discussion, scaling, and interpretations around it. And I'm no different. Going back now and trying to fix the story runs a real risk of making things worse rather than better, especially if changes are made hastily or without a clear creative vision. And without Toriyama around to closely oversee and course correct those decisions, that risk becomes even bigger. A remake that starts rewriting arcs could easily fracture the fan base instead of refreshing it. What will be far more interesting and genuinely give fans something new to engage with is animating the Dragon Ball Super manga. While the manga and anime always follow the same broad structure, they are not the same story. In fact, they differ in some pretty major ways. Power scaling and fight outcomes are handled very differently. In the manga, Super Saiyan Blue is treated as far more taxing and situational, while forms like Perfected Blue are introduced to explain stamina issues the anime largely ignores. Character portrayals shift noticeably. Goku is more reserved and tactical in the manga. Vegeta's growth is also more internalized. The Goku Black arc is arguably the biggest divergence. The manga places far more emphasis on strategy, godly mechanics, and Zamasu's philosophy, while the anime leans heavily into skeptical and repetition, often to his detriment. Tournament and power rules and scaling are far tighter in the manga. Fights are shorter, eliminations matter less, and the arc feels more like a battle attrition than a sequence of power showcases. Animating this version of Super would give fans something familiar yet new, a fresh lens to re-experience the era without discarding what already exists. And most importantly, it would act as a natural bridge towards what fans have been really waiting for, the Moro and Granola arc. If you haven't read those yet as a Dragon Ball fan, I genuinely recommend it. Carthus Dojo has some excellent breakdowns on both arcs that really help bring them to life and get you to speed. And no, it won't ruin the animated experience. If anything, it'll make you more excited for it. Now, a lot of people would say, why not just jump straight into the Moro and Granola arc? And I get that completely. But there's a very real reason why animating the Dragon Ball Super manga material first actually makes more sense. The anime and manga versions of Dragon Ball have never been identical, even going all the way back to Dragon Ball Z. The differences were significant enough that Dragon Ball Kai had to be created to realign the anime with the manga. Filler arcs like Garlic Jr., movie tie-ins, altered dialogue, and even major statements like Kid Buu being framed as the strongest form created a version of the story that simply didn't match the source material. Super amplified this divide even further. So if the anime suddenly jumps into Moro and Granola without establishing which continuity it's following, the question becomes unavoidable. Are we getting the manga faithfully adapted, or are we getting an anime original reinterpretation of those arcs? By animating the manga version of Dragon Ball Super first, the question gets answered naturally. It gets a clear foundation, aligns the audience with a consistent continuity, and lets Moro and Granola hit the scene with weight and clarity that they deserve, without confusion or contradiction. And that, more than any remake, is what could actually push the franchise forward instead of retreating old ground. Now, I do understand why people wouldn't want to sit through Battle of Gods again. That reaction makes complete sense. But this is where the manga context actually matters a lot more than people realize. In the Dragon Ball Super manga, Battle of Gods is extremely short. It's more of a condensed setup than a full arc, and Resurrection F isn't adapted adapted at all. It's skipped entirely. So the fear of having to rely on the early Super era beat for beat just isn't there if the manga is what's being animated. From there, the Goku Black arc and the Tournament of Power are already so different from their anime counterparts that they wouldn't feel like a retread anyway. Those arcs alone would give viewers plenty of new material to analyze and discuss. Having said that, this is where I think the studio would need to be careful, especially with the Tournament of Power. If they choose to adapt the manga version of Super, I don't think it should be a one-to-one recreation of how the Tournament of Power played out on page. And that's because, frankly, the manga's version of the tournament is far less engaging than what we got in the anime. The anime Tournament of Power was a cultural moment. Episodes were breaking the internet weekly, and Goku's Ultra Instinct debut, Jiren's overwhelming presence, Goku vs. Kefla, Vegeta's final stand, the constant escalation of power, those weren't just fights, they were events. Power scaling debates exploded, hype reached levels that we hadn't seen since the peak of Dragon Ball Z, and the intensity rarely let up. By comparison, the manga Tournament of Power feels pretty restrained. Fights are shorter, eliminations happen quickly, and many characters are removed before they get a real moment to shine. The arc leans more on efficiency than spectacle, and while that works on paper, it strips away a lot of the tension and excitement that made the tournament so memorable in animated form. Jiren in particular comes across as far less impressive in the manga. Ultra Instinct lacks the same earth-shattering impact, and the sense of desperation of universes being erased one by one never quite reaches the same emotional or visual heights. So if the manga-based Super adaptation were to happen, this is where expansion becomes necessary. Use the manga as the structural foundation, but let the Tournament of Power breathe. Restore the high-intensity battles, the extended clashes, and the power scaling moments that made the anime version unforgettable, without contradicting the manga's internal logic. When it comes to the Goku Black arc specifically, I honestly think it was the best part of the Dragon Ball Super manga before the Moro and Granola arcs were ever entered into the picture. The biggest reason for that is the pacing. The manga version moves with intent. It doesn't drag its feet, and it doesn't rely on repetitive beatdowns, and every major confrontation feels like it's actually pushing the story forward. By comparison, the anime often stretched moments out for spectacle, which sometimes came at the cost of momentum. Another massive improvement is how the manga actually uses Super Saiyan God. In the anime, God is essentially abandoned after its debut, immediately overshadowed by Blue, and never really treated as a viable form again. The manga fixes that completely. Super Saiyan God is framed as a form with clear advantages, better stamina control, sharper ki regulation, and tactical value, making it feel relevant instead of obsolete. Super Saiyan Blue is also handled far better. Rather than being treated as the debut transformation, Blue functions more like the original Super Saiyan did in Z. It has stages, drawbacks, and a clear learning curve. Goku and Vegeta don't just flip the switch and win, they have to earn mastery over it. Perfected Super Saiyan Blue isn't just a visual change, it's the result of training, refinement, and understanding the form's limitations. That progression adds real weight to the arc and makes the power scaling feel grounded instead of arbitrary. Because of that build-up, the fight between Merged Zamasu and Perfected Blue Goku stands as one of the manga's strongest battles. It's not just about who hits harder, it's about control, efficiency, and pushing a transformation to its absolute limit. The clash feels earned, deliberate, and meaningful in a way that many anime fights simply weren't. Taken as a whole, the Goku Black arc in the manga feels like a proof of concept, that Dragon Ball Super could deliver tighter storytelling, smarter power progression, and satisfying payoffs long before Moro and Granola raised the bar even higher. And that's exactly why animating the manga version of Super isn't just viable, it might be the best path forward. I completely understand why a lot of people would say that the best case scenario is just going straight into the Moro and Granola arcs though. From a hype perspective, that makes perfect sense. Those arcs are exactly what fans have been waiting to see animated, and they represent Dragon Ball Super at its strongest. But even beyond that, there's another angle here that actually works in everyone's favor. Using a manga-based Super adaptation or even a partial remake as a buffer period gives the staff the time they need to do Moro and Granola properly. These aren't arcs you want rushed. Moro's arc leans heavily on atmosphere, strategy, and gradual escalation, while Granola's arc is built on complex power mechanics, wish-based scaling, and long-term character consequences. Both require careful planning, strong storyboarding, and consistent animation quality. On top of that, it gives the Dragon Ball Super manga time to breathe and move forward. If the manga returns and continues into a full Black Frieza arc, then suddenly the anime isn't just catching up, it's setting itself up for a genuinely stacked run of content. And that's where things really start cooking. Instead of racing ahead and risking another production crunch, you create a pipeline, establish a clear continuity, refine the presentation, then roll straight into Moro and Granola and eventually Black Frieza with momentum already built. At that point, you're not just reviving Dragon Ball Super, you're positioning it for its strongest era since the end of Z. And honestly, that kind of long-term planning is exactly what the franchise needs right now. If done right, this isn't about stalling fans or retreating old ground. It's about setting the stage so that when those arcs finally hit, they hit hard.